The flight attendant's smile vanished as Marcus Carter, airline CEO, watched the white businessman demand those disruptive black children be removed from first class. The businessman froze when Marcus approached. "Those kids you're complaining about, they're my family." The cabin fell silent. Marcus's next decision would change everything. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more true stories about people who faced discrimination and stood up against it. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Let's find out what happened next. Marcus Carter clutched his leather portfolio as he strode through Atlanta International Airport's exclusive Sky Priority lane. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had built something substantial from nothing. His tailored Navy suit and the subtle Carter Airlines pin on his lapel were the only outward signs of his success. That, and the respectful nods from airport staff who recognized the founder and CEO of the country's fastest-growing airline. 20 years ago, no one would have believed that the skinny black kid from South Atlanta would one day run his own airline. Marcus still sometimes caught himself wondering if it was all a dream. Growing up in Mechanicsville, one of Atlanta's poorest neighborhoods, luxury air travel wasn't just out of reach. It had seemed like something from another universe. "Mr. Carter, your family just checked in. They should be boarding in about 30 minutes, said Valerie, the concierge manager who had personally escorted him through security. "Thank you, Valerie. Any chance I can surprise them at the gate?" "Of course, sir. I'll arrange it right away." Marcus smiled. He hadn't seen his sister Tanya and her 3 children in months. Between expanding Carter Airlines routes and fighting for the JFK terminal contract, family time had become precious and rare. This vacation to Los Angeles was long overdue, his first real break in 3 years. As Marcus waited in the private lounge, he scrolled through old family photos on his phone. There was Tanya at his company launch party 7 years ago, beaming with pride. Her husband James had still been alive then, before the car accident that left her raising 3 children alone. Marcus had stepped in to help financially, but money couldn't replace time. This trip was about reconnecting with the people who mattered most. At the other end of the terminal, Tanya Carter held tightly to 7-year-old Elijah's hand, while keeping an eye on Zoe, 10, and Jordan, 14, as they rolled their carry-on luggage through the bustling airport. "Remember, Uncle Marcus got us special tickets, so we need to be on our best behavior," she reminded them, straightening Jordan's collar. Jordan rolled his eyes in typical teenage fashion. "Mom, I know how to act. I'm not a baby." "I'm not a baby either," protested Elijah, puffing out his chest. Tanya smiled at her youngest. "Of course you're not. You're my big helper, right?" Zoe, always the peacemaker, adjusted her glasses. "The email said we get to board first because we're in first class. I've never flown first class before." "Me neither," Tanya admitted. She had insisted to Marcus that economy tickets would be fine, but her brother wouldn't hear of it. "Carter family flies Carter Airlines first class, or not at all," he'd declared. As a single mother working as a hospital administrator, Tanya could never have afforded such luxury on her own. The family approached Gate A23, where Flight 247 to Los Angeles was preparing for boarding. The gate agent's eyes widened slightly when she scanned their boarding passes. "Oh, you're in our Platinum First cabin. We'll be boarding you first. Would you like to wait in our priority lounge?" Tanya nodded, ushering her excited children into the plush waiting area. Jordan immediately noticed the free snacks and began filling a plate, while Zoe marveled at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. Elijah clutched his dinosaur backpack, eyes wide at the unexpected treats. "Look, Mom, that's our plane." Zoe pointed to the sleek aircraft bearing the distinctive Carter Airlines blue and silver livery. The company's slogan, "Rising Together," was emblazoned along the fuselage, a phrase Marcus had chosen to reflect both literal flight and his commitment to lifting his community as he succeeded. Meanwhile, rushing through the terminal with his phone pressed to his ear, Richard Whitfield barked orders to someone on the other end of the line. At 58, Richard had built Whitfield Properties into one of the Southeast's largest real estate development firms. His silver hair was expensively cut, His Italian loafers perfectly shined, and his manner suggested a man accustomed to deference. "Tell Jenkins I won't sign unless they remove that affordable housing clause," he snapped. "I don't care what the zoning board says. That's why we make donations to their campaigns, isn't it?" He ended the call without waiting for a response, checking his Rolex impatiently. His flight was boarding in 10 minutes, and Richard Whitfield was never late, except when he chose to be. The first-class cabin of Flight 247 was Marcus Carter's pride and joy. He had personally overseen its design, insisting on details that addressed every pain point he'd experienced as a frequent flyer before starting his own airline. The seats were wide and plush, converting into fully flat beds. Each station had privacy screens, customizable lighting, and a dedicated service button. The cabin was limited to just 16 passengers, ensuring attentive service. For Jessica Wilson, lead flight attendant working first class on Carter Airlines, was the pinnacle of her 12-year career in aviation. Unlike other airlines where she'd faced everything from entitlement to harassment, Carter Airlines empowered its staff with clear protocols protecting both employees and passengers. The company's zero-tolerance policy for abusive behavior was an industry standout. "Welcome aboard," Jessica greeted Tanya and her children as they entered the aircraft first. "You're in seats 2A through 2D. Can I help you with your bags?" Tanya thanked her, directing her children to their row. Zoe and Elijah pressed their faces against the windows, while Jordan, trying to appear unimpressed despite his excitement, casually reclined his seat to test its features. "Wow, Mom, look at these screens. They're bigger than our TV at home," Zoe exclaimed. "Inside voice, honey," Tanya reminded her, though she couldn't help smiling at her daughter's joy. As other first-class passengers began boarding, Tanya noticed occasional curious glances. She felt a familiar discomfort, the subtle scrutiny Black people often faced in predominantly white spaces, the unspoken question, "Do you belong here?" Richard Whitfield boarded last among the first-class passengers, his expression souring when he saw Tanya's family. His seat, 3A, was directly behind Zoe and Elijah. He stowed his briefcase, deliberately avoiding eye contact with Tanya. Marcus had slipped aboard during the boarding process and taken seat 5C, several rows behind his family. He wanted to surprise them mid-flight, a plan he'd arranged with Jessica. As he settled in, he observed the other passengers, including the silver-haired man who seemed irritated by the presence of children in first class. The scene triggered a memory Marcus had buried long ago. Summer, 1988. He was 10 years old, and his mother had cleaned houses in an affluent neighborhood with a community pool. She'd brought Marcus along one scorching day, and the homeowner had said he could swim while she worked. His joy had lasted exactly 12 minutes before the pool manager pulled him out, explaining that residents and their guests only were allowed. The humiliation burned hotter than the summer sun as other children stared and whispered. Now, watching the silver-haired man's thinly veiled disdain for his sister's family, Marcus felt that old anger stir, but he was no longer that powerless child. He was Marcus Carter, CEO. This was his airline. Still, he hesitated. Was it better to observe first, to give people the benefit of the doubt? Or was that just the habitual caution Black professionals learned to employ to avoid being labeled oversensitive or playing the race card? As the economy passengers filed past toward the back of the plane, Marcus noticed how Richard stiffened when Elijah laughed at something Zoe whispered. The man checked his watch, sighed loudly, and pressed the call button. Jessica appeared immediately. "Is there a problem with children in first class?" Richard asked, his voice pitched to Carrie. "I paid for peace and quiet." Jessica's professional smile didn't waver. "All our passengers are welcome in the cabins they've booked, sir. The children aren't being disruptive." Richard leaned closer. There must have been some mistake with their boarding passes. Perhaps they were upgraded due to the flight being oversold? "No, sir. The family booked first-class tickets." Marcus watched this exchange silently, his jaw tightening. The flight hadn't even taken off, and already his sister's children were being treated as interlopers. He thought of the countless meetings where he'd been mistaken for support staff rather than the founder, The loan officers who'd rejected his business plan until a white former colleague had vouched for him, the endless code switching required to make white investors comfortable. He had built Carter Airlines partly so his nephews and niece would grow up in a world with fewer of these indignities. Yet here they were, playing out in his own cabin. Marcus remained in his seat, watching. For now, the boarding process was nearly complete, with economy passengers settling into their seats in the main cabin. In first class, flight attendants offered pre-departure beverages, champagne, orange juice, or water, served in real glassware, another Carter Airlines distinction. Richard Whitfield sipped his champagne while scrolling through emails on his phone, but his concentration kept breaking each time Elijah or Zoe spoke. Their voices weren't particularly loud. In fact, Tanya had reminded them several times to use their library voices, but their very presence seemed to grate on Richard. "Mom, can I play my game?" Jordan asked, already pulling out his tablet. "Yes, but use your headphones," Tanya replied, helping Elijah fasten his seatbelt. Richard cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me," he called to Jessica as she passed. "I have an important business call after takeoff. Will there be any way to control the noise level?" His eyes flicked meaningfully toward Tanya's children. Jessica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "All passengers are asked to use headphones for electronic devices, sir, and the cabin is designed with excellent noise insulation." "That's not what I meant," Richard said, lowering his voice but not enough. "Surely there's a minimum age for first class. These seats are expensive specifically because professionals need to work or rest." 2 rows ahead, Tanya stiffened, clearly overhearing. She whispered something to her children, who immediately became quieter, Zoe's shoulders hunching slightly. In seat 5C, Marcus observed how his sister instinctively made herself and her children smaller in response to Richard's complaints. It was a familiar pattern. The burden of accommodation always falling on black people in white spaces. His Saiteno hand hovered over his seatbelt buckle, tempted to intervene, but he held back. Years of corporate politics had taught him to choose his moments carefully. Elena Martinez, a civil rights attorney seated across from Richard in 3B, looked up from her book. "The children seem perfectly well behaved to me," she said pleasantly but firmly. "In fact, I've been on flights with adults who were far more disruptive." Richard gave her a dismissive glance. "I've been flying first class for 30 years, ma'am. Standards have clearly slipped." "Or perhaps they've improved by becoming more inclusive," Elena countered, returning to her book. Richard turned away, muttering something under his breath. That included the phrase, "politically correct." He drained his champagne and signaled for another. As the final preparations for departure continued, Zoe turned around in her seat. "Mom," she whispered, though not quietly enough, "why is that man angry with us?" Tanya stroked her daughter's hair. "He's not angry with us, sweetie. Some people just have bad days. But he keeps looking at us funny. Don't worry about him. Just enjoy your first plane ride in first class." Jordan, who had been pretending to be absorbed in his game, removed one earphone. At 14, he was old enough to recognize the situation for what it was. "It's because we're black, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Tanya hesitated, caught between her instinct to protect her son from harsh realities and her commitment to raising him with awareness. "Some people make assumptions based on how we look," she finally said. "But that's their problem, not ours." Jordan nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting a knowledge beyond his years. "Uncle Marcus says we have every right to be anywhere we want to be. And he's absolutely right," Tanya affirmed, squeezing his hand. Behind them, Richard was becoming increasingly agitated as departure time approached. When Jessica passed by again, he stopped her. "Look," he said, gesturing toward Tanya's family. "I understand everyone can buy whatever ticket they want, but there must be some policy about upgrading these people to economy plus instead. I'd even be willing to cover the cost difference from their current tickets." Jessica's professional demeanor faltered momentarily. "Sir, those passengers have purchased first-class tickets, just as you have. There's no reason to move them. I find it hard to believe they paid full price," Richard persisted. "Was it some kind of affirmative action upgrade program?" Diversity initiative. At this, several nearby passengers looked over, some with shock, others with uncomfortable recognition of the situation unfolding. "Sir," Jessica said firmly, "Carter Airlines does not discriminate against any passengers. Everyone in this cabin has equal right to be here." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "I'm not discriminating. I just paid $6,000 for peace and quiet, not to listen to children who clearly aren't used to being in this environment." From his seat, Marcus had heard enough. The businessman wasn't just complaining about children. Plenty of adults did that regardless of race. No, the coded language was unmistakable. These people. Affirmative action upgrade. The implication that black people couldn't legitimately afford first class without special assistance. Every black professional recognized these dog whistles. Marcus unfastened his seatbelt and stood up, straightening his suit jacket. As he did, the captain announced over the intercom, "Flight attendants, prepare for departure." Jessica moved toward her jump seat, but Richard wasn't finished. He pressed the call button again insistently. "Sir, I need to take my seat for takeoff," Jessica explained. "This will just take a second," Richard insisted. "I want to speak to the purser or whoever's in charge. This is unacceptable." Elena Martinez intervened again. "The flight attendant asked you to let her prepare for takeoff. That's a safety requirement." Richard turned to her, irritation plain on his face. "With all due respect, this isn't your business. I'm a Platinum Elite member with over 1 million miles on this airline. And that entitles you to better service, not to harass other passengers," Elena replied coolly. By now, the tension in the EOS first-class cabin was palpable. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to notice, others watching with undisguised interest. Tanya had given her children books and tablets, trying to distract them from the brewing confrontation. Marcus stepped into the aisle and walked forward. As he approached Richard's seat, Jessica recognized him immediately. "Mr. Carter," she said, her relief evident. Richard looked up, confusion crossing his face at the flight attendant's deferential tone. Marcus smiled at Jessica. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Wilson?" Before she could answer, Richard interjected. "Yes, there is. I've been trying to explain that I need a quiet environment to work and you believe those children are too loud?" Marcus finished for him, his tone conversational but with an undercurrent of steel. "They don't belong in first class," Richard stated flatly. "It's clear they've never been in this environment before. Probably some kind of promotional upgrade." Marcus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I see. And what makes you think they don't belong?" Richard hesitated, suddenly aware of the attention from surrounding passengers. "Look, it's nothing personal. I just believe first class should have certain standards." "Standards," Marcus repeated. "And what standards are those exactly?" The moment hung in the air as Richard realized he was being backed into articulating his prejudice explicitly. He backpedaled slightly. "Professional adults who understand proper etiquette, not disruptive elements." "Disruptive," Marcus echoed. "Those children have been reading quietly and using headphones. The only disruption I've observed is coming from you, sir." Richard's face flushed. "Who exactly do you think you are?" Marcus extended his hand. "Marcus Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Airlines. And those disruptive children you're complaining about, they're my family." The first-class cabin fell into a stunned silence. Richard Whitfield's face cycled through expressions: disbelief, embarrassment, defensiveness, before settling into a tight smile. "You're the CEO?" he asked skeptically. "You expect me to believe that?" Jessica stepped forward. "This is indeed Mr. Carter, our founder and chief executive." Richard's eyes narrowed as he reassessed Marcus, taking in the bespoke suit and confident bearing he had somehow overlooked before. "Well," he said, attempting to recover, "I had no idea. You should have introduced yourself earlier." "Why?" Marcus asked simply. "Would it have changed how you spoke about those children?" The question hung in the air, direct and unavoidable. Around them, passengers shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, while others watched with undisguised interest. In the row ahead, Jordan had removed his headphones and was listening intently, his young face serious beyond his years. For Marcus, the moment brought back memories that still stung decades later. The time a department store security guard followed him through the men's section while ignoring white shoppers. The real estate agent who mysteriously had nothing available in certain neighborhoods. The investment banker who spoke to his white deputy instead of him during their entire first meeting, despite knowing Marcus was the founder. "Mr. Carter," Richard began, his tone conciliatory but patronizing. "You've misunderstood. My concern was never about... it had nothing to do with..." "With what?" Marcus pressed. Richard cleared his throat. "With anything inappropriate. I simply expect a certain atmosphere in first class." "And what atmosphere is that?" "Professional. Quiet. Dignified." Each word seemed to dig Richard deeper into his hole. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I designed this cabin myself, Mr. Whitfield." Richard Whitfield. "Mr. Whitfield, I designed this cabin to be inclusive and comfortable for all our first-class passengers. Families, business travelers, seniors, everyone who chooses to fly with us and can afford the ticket." By now, Tanya had turned in her seat, her eyes meeting her brother's with a mixture of pride and concern. Zoe and Elijah watched wide-eyed, not fully understanding the situation, but sensing its importance. "Marcus," Tanya said quietly, "it's okay. We don't want to cause any trouble." "You're not causing trouble, Tanya," Marcus replied, his voice gentle but firm. "You and the kids have every right to be here." Richard shifted in his seat, uncomfortable at being caught between the siblings. "Look, perhaps I overreacted. If they're related to you, obviously they're welcome here." The conditional nature of the acceptance wasn't lost on anyone. If they deserved respect only because of their connection to the CEO, then the underlying prejudice remained unchallenged. Elena Martinez spoke up from her seat. "So black children are only welcome in first class if they're related to the airline owner? Is that your position, Mr. Whitfield?" Richard's face flushed. "I never said anything about race." "You people always make everything about race." "You people?" Elena echoed, eyebrows raised. Richard realized his mistake too late. "I meant people who look for offense where none is intended." Marcus remained calm. "Mr. Whitfield, when you suggested my family had received affirmative action upgrades rather than believing they could afford first-class tickets, what exactly did you mean by that?" Several passengers inhaled sharply. One elderly white woman in 4B murmured, "Oh my," under her breath. Richard's posture stiffened defensively. "I never used those words." "You did, sir," Jessica confirmed quietly. "I heard you clearly." Richard looked around, finding no allies among the other passengers. "This is ridiculous. I'm a loyal customer with Platinum Elite status. I've flown over 1 million miles with this airline, and this is how I'm treated?" "1 million miles," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "That's impressive. I've flown more than that myself, mostly on competitors before starting Carter Airlines. Do you know why I started my own airline, Mr. Whitfield?" Without waiting for an answer, Marcus continued. 7 years ago, I was flying first class to a business meeting in Chicago. I was wearing a suit not unlike this one. The flight attendant asked me 3 times if I was in the right seat. 3 times. Even after I showed my boarding pass. Then a white passenger complained that I didn't look like I belonged there and suggested I'd been upgraded because the flight was oversold. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing similar situations they had witnessed or perpetuated. That day, I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I would create an airline where everyone who purchased a ticket would be treated with equal respect and dignity, where no one would have their presence questioned based on how they looked. Marcus's voice remained even, but there was passion behind his words. That's the foundation of Carter Airlines. Richard appeared increasingly desperate to extract himself from the situation. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I never meant to suggest..." "What did you mean to suggest, Mr. Whitfield?" Marcus interrupted. "Please, enlighten us." Richard glanced around the cabin, perhaps hoping for support that wasn't forthcoming. I'm not going to sit here and be accused of racism. I have black friends. I've supported diversity initiatives at my company. Having black friends doesn't give you a pass to disrespect black families, Marcus replied. I've never flown this airline before, Richard said, changing tactics. I usually fly Delta or American. Perhaps I'll return to them after this trip. That's certainly your prerogative, Marcus agreed. We want all our passengers to feel comfortable with their choice of airline. Richard's eyes narrowed at the implied dismissal. Are you saying you don't want my business? I'm saying that Carter Airlines values respect for all passengers. If you find that standard difficult to meet, then perhaps another carrier would better suit your needs. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Flight attendants, we're third in line for takeoff. Final preparation, please. Jessica gave Marcus an apologetic look. Mr. Carter, we need to prepare for departure. Marcus nodded. Of course. To Richard, he added, we can continue this conversation after takeoff if necessary. This is outrageous, Richard sputtered. I want to speak with you privately. Why? Marcus asked simply. Your complaints about my family weren't private. Why should my response be? Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of their race or appearance? Comment number 1 if you believe Marcus was right to confront Richard publicly, or comment number 2 if you think he should have handled it privately. Hit that like button if you appreciate people who stand up against discrimination, and subscribe to see what happens next in this true story of courage and consequences. How far do you think Richard will take this confrontation? And what might it cost Marcus to stand his ground? The stakes are about to get much higher. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, the tension in first class remained thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard Whitfield sat rigidly in his seat, alternating between glaring at his laptop screen and throwing occasional glances toward Marcus, who had moved to sit next to his sister after the seatbelt sign was turned off. You didn't have to do that, Tanya whispered to her brother, though the pride in her eyes contradicted her words. Yes, I did, Marcus replied quietly. I built this airline so people like us wouldn't have to shrink ourselves to make others comfortable. Jordan, overhearing, gave his uncle a subtle fist bump. The teenager had been watching everything with keen eyes, absorbing a master class in standing up for oneself with dignity. Zoe leaned across her mother. Uncle Marcus, are we in trouble? Marcus smiled at his niece. Not at all, sweetheart. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. Elijah, picking up on the tension despite his young age, asked, Is the angry man going to make us leave? No one is making you leave, Marcus assured him firmly. This is my airplane, and you are my special guests. Jessica approached with the drink cart. Mr. Carter, can I get you anything? Just water, thank you, Jessica. Marcus turned to his family. What about you guys? First-class service means you can have whatever you want. As Jessica served the Carter family, Richard closed his laptop with more force than necessary. When Jessica reached his row, he ordered a double scotch. Neat. Sir, we'll be serving lunch shortly, Jessica informed him. Would you like to see the menu? I've lost my appetite, Richard replied curtly, accepting the scotch. Marcus was helping Elijah select a movie when his phone vibrated with a text message. Glancing at the screen, his expression changed almost imperceptibly before he excused himself and returned to his original seat to take a call. Thomas, what's up? He asked quietly into his phone. Thomas Chen, Carter Airlines' chief financial officer, sounded concerned. Marcus, we just got a call from Whitfield Properties. They're threatening to pull out of the Terminal East development deal. Something about their CEO being harassed on one of our flights? Are you involved in this? Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The Terminal East project was a $50 million investment to expand Carter Airlines' presence at Atlanta International Airport, creating a premium lounge and dedicated gates. Whitfield Properties was the primary real estate developer and a major investor. Richard Whitfield is on my flight right now, Marcus confirmed. He was making racist comments about Tanya and the kids. I confronted him. Thomas's sigh was audible even over the plane's engine noise. Marcus, that deal represents 15% growth for next quarter. The board is counting on it. So I should let him disrespect my family to protect the bottom line? You know, that's not what I'm saying, Thomas replied, but this is business. Sometimes we have to separate personal feelings from professional relationships. Marcus had heard this advice countless times throughout his career. Swallow the microaggressions. Let the racist jokes slide. Don't make white people uncomfortable. The price of success for a black professional in America. I'll handle it, Marcus said finally, ending the call. When he looked up, Richard was standing in the aisle beside him, scotch in hand. We need to talk, Richard said, his voice low but intense. Now I understand why your name sounded familiar. Your company is partnering with mine on the Terminal East project. Marcus gestured to the empty seat beside him. Have a seat, Mr. Whitfield. Richard sat down, leaning in close. Let's cut to the chase. This little misunderstanding could have significant repercussions for both of us. Is that a threat? Marcus asked calmly. It's business reality, Richard countered. My company is providing 30% of the financing for Terminal East. The board votes on final approval next week. The implications were clear. Richard was leveraging his business connection to force Marcus to back down. Marcus thought back to the board meeting 3 months ago where he had pitched the Terminal East expansion. The excitement in the room had been palpable as he outlined how the project would create 200 new jobs and establish Carter Airlines as a major player at one of the world's busiest airports. The board members had applauded when he finished his presentation. Now all of that was in jeopardy because he had dared to stand up to racism directed at his own family. So what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Whitfield? Marcus asked. Richard took a sip of his scotch. I'm willing to forget this unfortunate incident. We all have bad days, say things we don't mean. I'll continue supporting the Terminal East deal, and you'll apologize for overreacting and causing a scene on your own. Aircraft. Marcus studied the man before him, seeing beyond the expensive suit and practiced smile to the entitlement beneath. How many times had Richard used his economic power to silence those he'd offended? How many people had been forced to accept his apologies to protect their livelihoods? That's an interesting proposal, Marcus said carefully. But I think you misunderstand the situation. I didn't overreact. I defended my family against racist implications. Richard's expression hardened. I never mentioned race, not once. You're the one who brought race into this. It was the classic deflection. Deny the obvious racial subtext, then accuse the person of color of making everything about race. Marcus had encountered this tactic countless times. Mr. Whitfield, when you suggested that black children couldn't legitimately be in first class without some special program or upgrade, the racial component was implicit in your assumptions. Richard drained his scotch. This is exactly why these conversations are impossible nowadays. Everything is racist. Everyone is offended. Well, I'm offended by being called a racist on a flight I paid good money for. From several rows ahead, Tanya approached, concern written across her face. Marcus, is everything okay? Marcus nodded reassuringly. Everything's fine, Tanya. Mr. Whitfield and I are just discussing business. Richard's demeanor changed instantly. Mrs. Carter, I want to apologize if my comments caused any distress. I assure you, it wasn't my intention. The conditional apology. If my comments caused distress, rather than for making offensive comments, was another familiar tactic, placing the burden on the recipient rather than taking responsibility. Tanya regarded him coolly. My children have done nothing wrong, Mr. Whitfield. They deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of who their uncle is. Of course, Richard agreed hurriedly. Children will be children. I was perhaps oversensitive to noise. Marcus noticed his sister's hands were trembling slightly, though her voice remained steady. It was a reminder of the emotional toll these confrontations took, even for someone as composed as Tanya. Why don't you go back to the kids? Marcus suggested gently. I'll join you in a minute. After Tanya returned to her seat, Richard leaned in again. Look, Carter, let's be practical. You've made your point. I've apologized. Now let's move past this before it affects both our companies. Marcus's phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. Whitfield's VP just called. They're putting the deal on hold pending review. What's happening up there? The pressure was mounting. Marcus had worked tirelessly to build Carter Airlines from a small regional carrier into a national brand. The Terminal East project wasn't just about expansion. It represented validation of his vision for a more inclusive air travel experience. Mr. Whitfield, Marcus began, I appreciate the importance of our business relationship, but I cannot and will not apologize for defending my family against prejudice, implicit or otherwise. Richard's face darkened. Then you're choosing personal pride over the welfare of your company? What about your employees, your shareholders? Are you willing to sacrifice their interests for this principle? It was the question that haunted every Black professional who faced discrimination. Was this particular battle worth the potential cost? When did standing up for dignity cross the line into self-sabotage? Marcus thought of Jordan watching this interaction, learning how a Black man should respond to racism. What lesson did he want to teach his nephew? I built my company on principles, Mr. Whitfield. Respect and dignity for everyone who flies with us is foundational, not optional. Richard stood abruptly. Then you've made your choice. I'll be instructing my board to withdraw from the Terminal East deal effective immediately. As Richard returned to his seat, Marcus felt the weight of his decision. Had he just sacrificed a $50 million deal and the company's growth trajectory over a principle? Would the board support him, or would they see this as reckless leadership? His phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Carter Airline stock dips 3% on rumors of development deal collapse. Word was already spreading. In the age of social media and instant communication, there were probably passengers live-streaming the confrontation or posting about it. The business implications were escalating by the minute. Marcus looked toward his family. Jordan was watching him intently, clearly aware that something significant was unfolding. The boy gave him a subtle nod as if to say, I see you standing up for us and it matters. In that moment, Marcus knew that whatever the financial cost, he had made the right decision. Some principles were worth fighting for, even at great expense. The flight had been in the air for 40 minutes when Richard Whitfield made his next move. After several hushed phone conversations from his seat, he flagged down Jessica as she passed with the lunch service. I need to be moved to a different seat, he demanded. I refuse to sit near these people any longer. Jessica's professional demeanor faltered momentarily at his choice of words. Sir, the first-class cabin is fully booked. There are no other available seats. Then move me to economy, Richard insisted. Anywhere away from this situation. I can check if there's availability, Jessica offered, though her expression suggested she recognized the absurdity of a first-class passenger voluntarily downgrading to economy. Before she could leave, Richard added loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, and I want it noted that I'm being forced to relocate due to harassment from your CEO. Marcus, who had been helping Elijah with his lunch tray, looked up sharply. The accusation was a complete inversion of reality, the kind of gaslighting that was all too familiar to those who confronted racism. Mr. Whitfield, Marcus said, evenly, standing up. No one is harassing you. You made discriminatory comments about my family. I addressed them, and now you're attempting to paint yourself as the victim. Richard's face flushed with anger. I never said anything discriminatory. This is slander, and my attorneys will have a field day with it. He pulled out his phone. In fact, I'm calling them right now. Sir, Jessica interjected, we're still above 10,000 feet. Cell phone calls aren't permitted. Fine, Richard snapped, aggressively punching at his phone screen. I'll email them instead, and I'm recording everything from this point forward. He held up his phone as if to start filming. Recording other passengers without consent violates our privacy policy, Jessica informed him. I'll have to ask you to put your phone away. This is outrageous. Richard's voice rose, drawing attention from throughout the cabin and even from some economy passengers peering through the divider curtain. I'm being treated like a criminal when I've done nothing wrong. Marcus remained calm, a skill he had, perfected through years of being the only black executive in countless boardrooms. "Mr. Whitfield, please lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers." "Oh, now I'm the one being disruptive?" Richard laughed bitterly. "That's rich coming from you. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I'm personal friends with 3 members of the FAA regulatory board." The threat was clear. Richard was escalating from business leverage to regulatory threats. It was a serious escalation, as airlines operated in a highly regulated environment where negative attention from authorities could create significant problems. Marcus made a quick decision. "Jessica, please inform the captain that we have a disruptive passenger in first class. Ask if security should meet the aircraft upon arrival in Los Angeles." Richard's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're having me removed? For what? Complaining about noise? For creating a disturbance, making discriminatory comments, attempting to record passengers without consent, and now threatening regulatory action against the airline." Marcus replied steadily. Around them, other passengers were reacting variously. Some looked uncomfortable. Others were openly supporting Marcus with nods or murmured agreement, while a few seemed impatient for the conflict to end so they could enjoy their flight in peace. "You can't do this," Richard insisted, though a note of uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I'm a paying customer. Our terms of service, which you agreed to when purchasing your ticket, clearly state that discriminatory behavior toward staff or other passengers is grounds for removal," Marcus explained. Jessica excused herself to speak with the captain, leaving Marcus and Richard in a tense standoff. "You're making a serious mistake," Richard warned, lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea how much business I could direct to or away from your airline? My company arranges corporate travel for 12 partner firms." Marcus was acutely aware of the potential financial implications. Every CEO had to balance principles against pragmatism, but there were lines that couldn't be crossed, compromises that cost too much not in dollars, but in dignity. "Mr. Whitfield, I built this airline specifically so that people like my family could travel without being made to feel they don't belong. If maintaining that environment costs us your business, it's a price I'm willing to pay." By now, other passengers had begun posting about the confrontation on social media. Marcus's phone was buzzing constantly with messages from his executive team, board members, and the PR department. One text from his communications director read, "Trending on Twitter, stock down 5%, need statement ASAP." Elena Martinez, who had been observing quietly, spoke up. "Mr. Carter, as a frequent business traveler, I want you to know that your stance makes me more likely to choose your airline in the future, not less." Several other passengers nodded in agreement. An elderly, black man in seat 4D added, "I started flying your airline because of your reputation for treating everyone with respect. Don't back down now." Richard noticed the shift in the cabin's mood and changed tactics. "Look, this has gotten out of hand. I'm willing to issue a formal apology if we can put this behind us." Marcus regarded him skeptically. "An apology would be appropriate, but I suspect it's motivated more by self-preservation than genuine remorse." "Take it or leave it," Richard said tersely. "But if you continue with this removal nonsense, my offer is off the table. And so is any future business relationship." The implicit threat hung in the air. "Apologize to me publicly, or I'll use my considerable influence to hurt your company." Jessica returned, her expression troubled. "Mr. Carter, the captain has requested that you come to the cockpit." Marcus nodded. "Please keep an eye on things here." In the cockpit, Captain Laura Reynolds looked concerned. "Marcus, we've got a situation. Air traffic control just informed us that we have a priority message from corporate. Your board chair is requesting an emergency video conference." Marcus wasn't surprised. Barbara Thornton had been supportive when he founded the airline, but had grown increasingly focused on shareholder value as the company expanded. "Also," Laura continued, "we're getting reports that this confrontation is going viral on social media. Passengers are live streaming from their seats." "What's your assessment of the situation?" Marcus asked. As a former pilot himself, he valued Laura's judgment. From a safety perspective, Whitfield is being disruptive but not dangerous. From a company perspective, she hesitated. This could get complicated, but I trust your judgment, Marcus. You built this airline on principles. The crew stands with you. Her support meant more than she could know. Thank you, Laura. I'll take that call from Barbara. The video conference was brief and tense. Barbara's face filled the small screen in the cockpit's communication system, her expression grave. Marcus, what the hell is happening up there? Whitfield Properties just issued a statement that they're terminating all business relationships with Carter Airlines due to unprofessional conduct by leadership. Our stock is in freefall. Marcus explained the situation succinctly, emphasizing Richard's discriminatory behavior toward his family. Barbara sighed heavily. Marcus, I understand your position personally, but as board chair, I have to tell you that this could seriously damage the company. Can you find a way to de-escalate? Perhaps a mutual apology. I won't apologize for defending my family against racism, Barbara. Then at least handle it privately. The social media exposure is killing us. The confrontation became public because Whitfield made it public, Marcus pointed out. He chose to loudly question my family's right to be in first class. Barbara looked pained. The board is convening an emergency session. This incident could trigger a confidence vote, Marcus. The implication was clear. His position as CEO could be in jeopardy. I understand the stakes, Marcus said quietly. But some principles aren't negotiable. When Marcus returned to the cabin, the situation had deteriorated further. Richard was standing in the aisle, recording with his phone despite Jessica's repeated requests to stop. Tanya was shielding Elijah, who had begun crying, while Jordan stood protectively in front of his mother and siblings. What's happening here? Marcus demanded. Your flight attendant tried to confiscate my phone, Richard claimed, still recording. I'm documenting this harassment for my lawsuit. He was recording the children, Uncle Marcus, Jordan reported, his young voice steady despite the situation. I asked him to stop, and he told me to mind my own business. The accusation added a disturbing new dimension to Richard's behavior. Recording minors without parental consent crossed yet another line. Mr. Whitfield, Marcus said, his voice now carrying an edge of steel. Turn off that phone immediately. I know my rights, Richard insisted. This is a public space. This is a private aircraft operated by a private company, Marcus corrected. Him. And you are harassing a family with minor children. Elijah's crying had intensified, his small face buried against Tanya's shoulder. Why does he hate us? The 7-year-old sobbed, his words cutting through the tension in the cabin. The innocent question hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was the real cost of racism, not just economic opportunities denied or professional respect withheld, but the psychological damage inflicted on children who couldn't understand why they were treated as unwelcome simply because of their skin color. Something shifted in Marcus at that moment. The calculated business leader weighing costs and benefits was replaced by the protective uncle who could no longer tolerate seeing his family hurt. That's enough, he said with quiet authority. Jessica, please inform the captain that Mr. Whitfield will be removed upon landing, and notify Los Angeles International that we'll need security at the gate. Richard lowered his phone, finally seeming to realize the seriousness of the situation. You're actually going through with this? Do you have any idea what this will cost you? I do, Marcus replied. And it's worth it. The businessman's composure cracked. You people always stick together, don't you? Play the victim card when it suits you? The mask had finally dropped completely, revealing the naked prejudice beneath. Several passengers gasped at the overtly racist comment. Mr. Whitfield, Marcus said, his voice dangerously quiet. You've just demonstrated exactly why this action is necessary. Richard jabbed a finger toward Marcus. This isn't over. I'll own this airline when my lawyers are done with you. Discrimination, harassment, public humiliation. You'll face charges for all of it. Throughout the cabin, passengers had their phones out, recording the meltdown. The confrontation had become a public spectacle that would likely be viewed by millions before the plane even landed. Marcus turned to the rest of the first-class passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this disruption to your flight. I founded Carter Airlines with a commitment that every passenger would be treated with dignity and respect. Sometimes upholding that commitment requires difficult decisions. Most passengers nodded in understanding, some even offering quiet applause. A few looked away uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing something of themselves in Richard's attitude. As Marcus returned to comfort his family, his phone buzzed with another text from Barbara. Board vote split. Holding emergency press conference upon your landing. Stock down 8% and falling. The business consequences were mounting by the minute. But looking at Elijah's tear-stained face, Marcus knew some costs were worth bearing, regardless of the price tag. Have you ever had to choose between standing up for what's right and avoiding conflict? Comment number 1 if you faced a situation where principles collided with practicality, or comment number 2 if you believe businesses should always prioritize their bottom line. Like this video if you respect Marcus's courage, and subscribe to see how this high-stakes confrontation concludes. What do you think will happen when the plane lands? Will Marcus keep his company, or will standing up for his family cost him everything he's built? The story takes an unexpected turn in our next section. As Flight 247 began its initial descent into Los Angeles, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained charged with tension. Richard Whitfield sat rigidly in his seat, periodically typing furious messages on his phone despite the crew's requests to prepare for landing. Marcus had returned to sit with his family, doing his best to comfort Elijah, who remained shaken by the confrontation. "Are they going to take your airplane away, Uncle Marcus?" the 7-year-old asked, his voice small, but the question penetrating. Marcus met his nephew's worried eyes. "No, buddy. No one can take my airplane away." "But that man said..." "Some people say things when they're angry that aren't true," Marcus explained gently. "What matters is that we stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Jordan, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I'm proud of you, Uncle Marcus." The simple statement from his teenage nephew affected Marcus more deeply than any board approval or investor praise ever had. This was the legacy that truly mattered, teaching the next generation to stand with dignity against injustice. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Jessica approached Marcus's row. "Mr. Carter, I've just received word that airport security will meet the aircraft at gate B-23. They've been briefed on the situation." "Thank you, Jessica. And thank you for how you've handled everything. I know this hasn't been easy." Jessica lowered her voice. "The entire crew supports you, sir. What you're doing matters to all of us." As she moved away to secure the cabin for landing, Marcus's phone lit up with a message that made his blood run cold. "Whitfield on board of LAX Expansion Committee. Votes next week on our new terminal proposal." The implications were staggering. Richard Whitfield wasn't just threatening the Atlanta Terminal East project. He had influence over Carter Airlines' planned Los Angeles expansion as well, a cornerstone of the company's West Coast strategy. The business stakes had just doubled. Marcus glanced toward Richard, who caught his eye and smiled coldly, as if he knew exactly what message Marcus had just received. The man's confidence suggested he was fully aware of his leverage and intended to use it. The plane touched down smoothly at Los Angeles International Airport, taxiing toward gate B-23. As they approached the gate, Marcus could see through the windows that something unusual was happening. Media vans with satellite dishes were parked near the terminal, and a group of airport officials stood waiting on the jet bridge. "This doesn't look good," Tanya murmured, following his gaze. Marcus squeezed her hand reassuringly. "It'll be okay." As the aircraft doors prepared to open, Richard stood up, straightening his tie. "Last chance, Carter. Call off the security escort, issue a public apology, and I might be persuaded to maintain our business relationship. Mr. Whitfield, please remain seated until security arrives," Jessica instructed firmly. Richard ignored her. "Do you realize I sit on the board that will vote on your LAX terminal proposal next week? One word from me, and 7 years of planning goes down the drain." The revelation was clearly meant to be Marcus's breaking point, the final pressure that would force him to capitulate. For a moment, Marcus wavered. The Los Angeles terminal would create hundreds of jobs and establish Carter Airlines as a major player on the West Coast. Could he really sacrifice that over a matter of principle? Tanya seemed to read his thoughts. Marcus, don't risk everything you've built. We can handle this. We've dealt with people like him our whole lives. That's exactly the problem, Marcus replied quietly. We've always had to handle it. Smile through the insults. Ignore the slights. Pretend it doesn't hurt when people treat us like we don't belong. Richard smirked, sensing advantage. Listen to your sister, Carter. Be reasonable. Zoe, who had been watching the adults intently, suddenly spoke up. Mister, why don't you like us? You don't even know us. The simple question from the 10-year-old cut through the complex adult calculations to the heart of the matter. Richard blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by being directly addressed by the child he had complained about. It's not that I don't like you, little girl. This is adult business you wouldn't understand. I understand that you were mean to us because we're black, Zoe replied with the directness only children can manage. My mom says that's called prejudice. She says it's not about us. It's about the person being prejudiced. Richard's face flushed. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to be lectured by a child about racism. Why not? Elena Martinez interjected from her seat. She seems to understand it better than you do. Several passengers nodded or murmured agreement. The mood in the cabin had shifted decisively against Richard, whose facade of professional concern had crumbled to reveal the prejudice beneath. You people are all the same, Richard snapped, his mask slipping completely. Play the race card when it suits you, then cry discrimination when you're called out. The slur hung in the air, impossible to misinterpret or explain away. Gasps echoed through the cabin as passengers reacted to the naked racism of the statement. What did you just say? Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Richard seemed to realize his error too late. I didn't mean… You meant exactly what you said, Marcus interrupted, and you've just shown everyone exactly who you are. At that moment, the aircraft door opened, and 2 airport security officers stepped into the cabin. Behind them stood a woman in a Carter Airlines executive uniform, Vanessa Rodriguez, the company's chief operating officer and Marcus's most trusted colleague. Mr. Carter, one of the security officers said, we understand you have a situation requiring our assistance? Before Marcus could respond, Vanessa stepped forward. Marcus, a word please. Privately. In the jetway, Vanessa didn't mince words. The board is in emergency session. Barbara is trying to contain the damage, but our stock is down 12%. Investors are panicking. And you think I should back down? Marcus stated rather than asked. Vanessa hesitated. I think you should consider all angles. This isn't just about one racist passenger anymore. It's about the future of the company. It's always been about the future of the company, Marcus corrected her. What kind of company do we want to be? One that stands by its values, or one that compromises them when it becomes expensive? There are 1,500 employees depending on those Los Angeles expansion jobs, Marcus. Families with mortgages and college tuitions. It was the hardest part of leadership, weighing the principled stand against the practical consequences for others who depended on the company's success. Marcus felt the weight of those 1,500 families on his shoulders. What would you do in my position, Vanessa? Honestly. She looked away, conflict clear in her expression. I don't know. I'm not black. I haven't lived your experience. But as COO, I have to advocate for the company's stability. Inside the cabin, Richard was arguing loudly with the security officers, creating a scene that passengers were eagerly recording on their phones. The confrontation had fully devolved into a spectacle that would dominate social media within hours. Marcus made his decision. Tell the board I'll issue a statement immediately after we deplane. But I'm not backing down on removing Whitfield. Some lines can't be crossed. When Marcus re-entered the cabin, Richard was being escorted toward the exit, still protesting his treatment. As he passed Marcus, he hissed, "You've just destroyed your company. I hope it was worth it." Marcus watched him go, uncertain whether the statement would prove prophetic. Then he turned to address the remaining passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize for the disruption to your flight. At Carter Airlines, we believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of race, gender, age, or any other characteristic. Sometimes upholding that principle comes at a cost, but it's a cost worth paying. To his surprise, most of the passengers broke into spontaneous applause. Even some who had seemed uncomfortable during the confrontation joined in, perhaps recognizing the courage it took to stand firm. Elena Martinez approached as passengers began to deplane. "Mr. Carter, I'm a civil rights attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative. What happened today was textbook discrimination, and I'd be happy to provide a statement supporting your actions if needed." "Thank you, Ms. Martinez. I may take you up on that offer." As the cabin emptied, Marcus rejoined his family. Jordan was helping Elijah with his backpack while Tanya gathered their belongings. Zoe looked up at her uncle with serious eyes. "Did you get in trouble because of us, Uncle Marcus?" Marcus knelt to her level. "No, sweetheart. I stood up for what's right. That's never something to regret, even when there are consequences." Outside the aircraft, the media was waiting. Cameras flashed as Marcus emerged with his family, reporters shouting questions about the confrontation. Barbara Thornton stood at a makeshift podium, clearly preparing to do damage control. But before Marcus could join her, a surprising development unfolded. A group of passengers from the flight, led by Elena Martinez, approached the media. "We witnessed everything," Elena announced, "and we want to publicly support CEO Marcus Carter's decision to remove a passenger who was making overtly racist comments toward a black family." One by one, passengers stepped forward to corroborate the account. An elderly white couple, a young Asian American student, a middle-aged Latina woman, a diverse cross-section of travelers united in their condemnation of Richard's behavior and support for Marcus's response. As they spoke, Marcus noticed something remarkable happening on his phone. Social media was exploding not with criticism of Carter Airlines, but with support. Hashtags like "Stand with Carter" and "Fly with Dignity" were trending. Customer testimonials poured in, many from people of color who had experienced similar discrimination while traveling. And most surprisingly, Marcus's email inbox was filling with messages from investors and business partners, not pulling away from Carter Airlines, but doubling down on their support. One venture capital firm offered to replace Whitfield's investment in the Terminal East project to support a company with the courage of its convictions. Barbara approached, her expression a mixture of amazement and relief. "The board vote just came in. Unanimous support for your actions, Marcus, and our stock has started to recover already." "What about the LA terminal project?" Marcus asked. "That's the most incredible part," Barbara replied. "3 other members of the approval committee have already reached out to distance themselves from Whitfield. They're suggesting the vote be expedited to show there's no ill will toward Carter Airlines." It was a stunning reversal of fortune. The potential business disaster transforming into a defining moment for the company's brand and values. As Marcus absorbed this news, Elijah tugged at his hand. "Uncle Marcus, can we go home now?" Marcus smiled down at his nephew. "Yes, buddy, we can go home." The confrontation had tested not just Marcus's personal resolve, but the very foundation of the company he had built. In standing firm, he had discovered that principles and profits weren't always in opposition. Sometimes, standing for something meaningful was also good business. The next 48 hours unfolded in a whirlwind of media coverage, corporate strategy sessions, and family conversations. Marcus had barely stepped off the aircraft when his phone began ringing nonstop. Board members, investors, media outlets, and even political figures all wanting statements about what was now being called the first-class confrontation. Inside the exclusive Carter Airlines lounge at LAX, Marcus huddled with his executive team, while Tanya took the children to their hotel. The initial panic about stock prices and investor confidence had given way to a more complex reality. The incident was polarizing, but not in the way they had feared. "The video has over 7 million views already," reported Melissa Wong, the airline's social media director. "Comments are running roughly 80% supportive of our position. Most negative comments are typical trolling, not genuine customer complaints." Vanessa pulled up a real-time analytics dashboard on her tablet. We're seeing an interesting pattern. Bookings initially dropped right after the news broke, but they've rebounded and are now running 15% above normal. Marcus raised an eyebrow. People are booking flights because of this? It appears so, Vanessa confirmed. The hashtag #WantFlyWithDignity is driving significant traffic to our booking site. Many customers are explicitly stating they're choosing us because of your stand against racism. It was a powerful reminder that business decisions didn't exist in a moral vacuum. Customers, especially younger ones, increasingly expected the companies they patronized to stand for something beyond profit. Barbara Thornton, who had flown in from Atlanta specifically for crisis management, looked both relieved and vindicated. She had supported Marcus's vision from the beginning, even when other investors had been skeptical about building an airline brand partly on social values. The board's unanimous support wasn't just moral, Marcus, she explained. The data shows your approach is good business. Today's consumers want authenticity and values alignment from the brands they choose. Not everyone was celebrating, however. Thomas Chen, the CFO, looked troubled as he joined the meeting late. Whitfield Properties has officially terminated our contract for Terminal East, he reported grimly, and they're demanding return of their initial investment, with interest. The news landed like a stone in the room. Despite the positive public reaction, there were still real business consequences to navigate. Options? Marcus asked. Thomas spread his hands. We fight it in court, which would be expensive and keep the story in the news cycle. Or we settle, which feels like admitting wrongdoing. There's a third option, Barbara interjected. I've been fielding calls all morning from other investors interested in the Terminal East project. Blackstone Group and 2 minority-owned investment firms have already submitted term sheets. They're offering better terms than Whitfield. It was another unexpected development. The controversy had created new opportunities even as it closed others. What about the Los Angeles expansion? Marcus asked, thinking of the 1,500 jobs that had weighed so heavily on his decision. Vanessa smiled for the first time since the crisis began. That's actually the best news. 3 board members from the approval committee called personally to express support for Carter Airlines. They fast-tracked our proposal and separated it entirely from Whitfield's influence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the rapid shifts in their business landscape. What had seemed like potential disaster was transforming into something else entirely, a defining moment that could either break the company or elevate it to new heights. We need to be careful not to appear opportunistic, he cautioned. This can't look like we're exploiting a racial incident for marketing purposes. The team nodded in agreement. Navigating the aftermath required a delicate balance, standing firmly by their principles without commodifying the struggle against racism. As the meeting continued, Marcus's phone lit up with a text from Tanya. You need to see this. Turn on CNN. Vanessa grabbed the remote and switched on the lounge's television. Richard Whitfield's face filled the screen as he held an impromptu press conference outside his Los Angeles hotel. This is a clear case of reverse discrimination, he was saying, his expression a carefully crafted mask of injured dignity. I raised legitimate concerns about disruptive behavior in a premium cabin, and CEO Marcus Carter chose to make it about race because the passengers in question happened to be black. The reporter pushed back. Multiple witnesses have stated that you used racially charged language and suggested the black family didn't legitimately belong in first class. Richard waved this away. My words have been twisted and taken out of context. I have a long history of supporting diversity initiatives. My company has received awards for inclusive hiring practices. As if on cue, a small group of individuals, presumably Whitfield Properties employees, appeared behind him, conspicuously diverse in appearance. The transparent attempt to use them as racial shields drew disgusted murmurs from the Carter Airlines team watching. This is the oldest play in the book, Marcus observed, shaking his head. Use black and brown employees as props to claim you can't possibly be racist. The press conference took an even more troubling turn as Richard announced, I've filed a formal complaint with the FAA regarding discriminatory treatment by Carter Airlines. I've also initiated a $50 million lawsuit for defamation, emotional distress, and damage to my professional reputation. The executive team exchanged concerned glances. Legal battles, regardless of merit, could drain resources and attention for months or even years. "He's bluffing," said Michael Rivera, the airline's chief counsel. "His case is weak, especially with so many witnesses contradicting his version of events. But he knows litigation is expensive and distracting. It's a pressure tactic." Marcus turned to Barbara. "We don't settle. Not on this. We fight it all the way, whatever it costs." She nodded firmly. "The board will back you. This is about more than money now." As the day progressed, the media narrative continued to evolve. Aviation blogs and business publications dissected the incident from every angle. Industry experts debated whether Marcus's actions represented bold leadership or reckless risk-taking. Social justice advocates praised the stand against casual racism, while some business commentators questioned whether a CEO should inject politics into company operations. By evening, Marcus finally made it to the hotel where Tanya and the Iowa children were staying. He found them in the suite's living room, Jordan intensely focused on his phone. "Uncle Marcus, you're trending on Twitter," the teenager announced as Marcus entered. "People are calling you a hero." "I'm no hero, Jordan. I just did what was right." Tanya gave her brother a searching look. "How bad is it for the company?" "Complicated," Marcus admitted, sinking into an armchair. "We've lost Whitfield's business, which hurts, but we're gaining new customers and investors who appreciate our values. It's too soon to know the net impact." Jordan hadn't looked up from his phone. "There are some really racist comments on these posts," he said quietly. "People saying awful things about us." Marcus and Tanya exchanged concerned glances. This was an unfortunate side effect they hadn't fully considered, exposing the children to the uglier sides of social media racism. "Let me see that," Marcus said gently, taking the phone. The comments beneath news articles about the incident included vile racial slurs and threats, alongside messages of support and solidarity. "This is why I don't want you reading the comments," Tanya told her son. "There are always going to be hateful people hiding behind keyboards." "But there are good comments too," Jordan pointed out. "People saying they're proud of Uncle Marcus for standing up to that man." Marcus returned the phone but placed a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Jordan, I want you to remember something important. Those hateful comments tell you nothing about your worth and everything about the brokenness of the people writing them. Don't let them into your head." Jordan nodded solemnly. "I won't." Across the room, Zoe was helping Elijah build a fort out of hotel pillows. Both children seemingly recovered from the airplane confrontation. Children were resilient, but Marcus wondered what lasting impressions the incident might leave. What subtle lessons about their place in the world they might have absorbed. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Whitfield Properties stock down 7% amid racism allegations against CEO. The confrontation was having business repercussions for Richard as well. Corporate racism had become increasingly costly in an era where consumers and investors alike expected better from companies and their leaders. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Marcus and Tanya sat on the hotel suite's balcony overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. "Do you regret it?" Tanya asked softly. "Standing up to him so publicly?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I regret that it happened at all. I regret that your children had to witness it. But no, I don't regret my response. Even with the lawsuit and the business complications?" "Especially with those," Marcus affirmed. "What message would it send to Jordan, Zoe, and Elijah if I had prioritized business relationships over their dignity? What kind of example would that set?" Tanya smiled sadly. "You sound like Dad." Their father, William Carter, had been a civil rights activist in Atlanta during the 1960s, participating in lunch counter sit-ins and voter registration drives. He had taught his children that dignity wasn't negotiable, even when standing up for it came at a personal cost. Dad never got to see the airline, Marcus reflected. But I think he would have understood that it wasn't just about building a successful business. It was about creating spaces where we could exist fully, without having to make ourselves small. He would have been proud of you today, Tanya assured him, squeezing his hand. As they sat in companionable silence, Marcus's phone rang. It was Jessica Wilson, the flight attendant from Flight 247. "Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to bother you so late," she began. "It's no bother, Jessica. Is everything okay? I wanted you to know something. The entire cabin crew from today's flight has submitted statements to Human Resources supporting your actions. And it's not just our flight. Crew members throughout the airline are sending messages of support." Marcus was deeply moved. "Thank you for telling me that, Jessica." "There's more," she continued. "Many of us have experienced similar situations, passengers making racist or sexist comments, and felt powerless to address them properly. Your example today has meant a lot to us." After the call ended, Marcus shared Jessica's message with Tanya. "You've started something bigger than just one confrontation," she observed. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps that was the silver lining in this difficult situation. The opportunity to transform an ugly incident into meaningful change, not just for his family or his company, but for a broader conversation about dignity, respect, and belonging. As he prepared for bed, his phone buzzed one final time. It was a message from Barbara. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow 9 a.m. Richard Whitfield has called a press conference for 10 a.m. Be prepared for anything." The fallout was far from over. The Carter Airlines boardroom in their Los Angeles offices hummed with tense energy as executives and directors gathered around the massive mahogany table. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, but no one was admiring the scenery this morning. All eyes were fixed on the large screen displaying social media feeds, news coverage, and real-time stock price movements. Marcus sat at the head of the table, tie loosened slightly after a night of minimal sleep. Barbara Thornton had taken the seat to his right, while Thomas Chen, still worried about the financial implications, sat to his left. The rest of the executive team and board members filled the remaining chairs, some joining virtually from Atlanta and other locations. "Let's start with the numbers," Marcus said, turning to Thomas. The CFO adjusted his glasses. "Our stock initially dropped 15% but has recovered about half of that loss. Trading volume is 5 times normal. Market analysts are split. Some see this as a concerning disruption, others as a positive brand differentiation play." "Customer response?" Marcus asked, turning to Melissa. "Bookings remain above average, especially in our core demographic of 25 to 45-year-olds. We're seeing a significant uptick in first-time customers citing our values as their reason for trying Carter Airlines." "And the negatives?" Melissa hesitated. "We're seeing organized boycott threats from some conservative business groups. Several corporate accounts have canceled their contracts, though they represent less than 3% of our business travel revenue. And there's a social media campaign questioning whether this was a staged incident to generate publicity." "Ridiculous," Barbara muttered. Michael Rivera, the chief counsel, cleared his throat. "We need to discuss the lawsuit. Whitfield has retained Sullivan & Gray, one of the top litigation firms in the country. They specialize in high-profile defamation cases." "What's our exposure?" Marcus asked. "Minimal on the merits," Michael replied. "We have multiple witnesses, video evidence and flight records that support our version of events. But litigation isn't always about merits. It's about resources, publicity, and pressure points. And Whitfield has resources to burn," Barbara added grimly. "There's something else you should know," Vanessa interjected. "Our security team intercepted communications suggesting Whitfield plans to make this personal. They're digging into your past, Marcus. College activism, previous business disputes, anything they can use to paint you as having a racial agenda rather than legitimate business concerns." Marcus absorbed this news stoically. He had always known that as a black CEO, his actions would be scrutinized differently than those of his white counterparts. The double standard was frustrating, but not surprising. "So what are our options?" he asked the room. Barbara leaned forward. "The PR team has prepared 3 potential approaches. First, we can minimize, issue a brief statement regretting the misunderstanding and move on. Second, we can counterattack. Release all witness statements and video evidence showing Whitfield's behavior. Or third, we can elevate, use this as a platform to announce new company-wide anti-discrimination initiatives. The room divided quickly. Thomas and several board members favored minimizing, arguing that prolonging the story would only hurt the stock price. Vanessa and the younger executives pushed for counterattacking, believing the evidence would vindicate Marcus completely. Barbara advocated for the third approach, seeing an opportunity to strengthen the company's brand identity. Marcus listened to the debate without commenting, weighing each perspective carefully. As CEO, the final decision was his, but he valued the input from his team. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about defining what Carter Airlines stood for. "Before I decide," he said finally, "there's something else we need to consider. This isn't just happening to the company, it's happening to my family. Tanya and the kids are being dragged into this through no choice of their own." The room fell silent, executives suddenly remembering the personal dimension of the crisis. For them, it was a business challenge to navigate. For Marcus's family, it was an invasion of privacy, an unwanted spotlight on children who had done nothing wrong except exist in first class while black. "What does Tanya think?" Barbara asked gently. "She's concerned about the children, especially Jordan. He's old enough to understand what's happening and follow it online. Some of the comments have been difficult." Nods of understanding rippled around the table. The darker corners of social media could be vicious, particularly around issues of race. "Mr. Carter," his assistant interrupted, appearing at the door. "Ms. Martinez is here. She says you're expecting her?" Elena Martinez entered the boardroom, with the confident stride of someone accustomed to high-stakes environments. As she had mentioned on the flight, she was a civil rights attorney with the Equal Justice Initiative, specializing in discrimination cases. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Martinez," Marcus greeted her, gesturing to an empty chair. "After what I witnessed on that flight, I couldn't stay silent," Elena replied. "Especially now that I see how Mr. Whitfield is attempting to twist the narrative." She opened her briefcase and removed a folder. "I've prepared a formal statement as a witness to the incident. I've also spoken with 5 other passengers who are willing to go on record about what they saw and heard." Michael Rivera accepted the documents eagerly. "This is extremely helpful. Contemporaneous witness statements from uninvolved third parties carry significant weight." "There's more," Elena continued. "After researching Mr. Whitfield, I discovered this isn't his first incident involving racial bias. 3 former employees of Whitfield Properties have filed discrimination complaints with the EEOC in the past 5 years. All were settled confidentially, but I have contacts who can provide details if necessary." The revelation changed the dynamic in the room. What had seemed like an isolated confrontation was revealing itself as part of a pattern of behavior. "That's valuable information," Marcus acknowledged, "but I don't want to turn this into a personal attack on Whitfield. This isn't about him as an individual. It's about the broader principle at stake." "With respect, Mr. Carter," Elena countered, "Whitfield has made it personal. His press conference is in less than an hour, and my sources indicate he plans to paint himself as the victim of reverse discrimination while portraying you as a CEO who abused his power." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from Jessica Wilson. "The crew members from Flight 247 are at reception. We'd like to speak with you before Whitfield's press conference." Marcus excused himself and went to the reception area, where he found Jessica along with 5 other crew members from the flight, all in their Carter Airlines uniforms. "We wanted you to know that we've all submitted formal statements to HR supporting your actions," Jessica explained, "and we'd like to attend the press conference as a unified presence." "I appreciate that more than I can say," Marcus told them, genuinely moved by their solidarity. "But you should know that this could get contentious. Whitfield has powerful allies." One of the flight attendants, a young black man named Darius, stepped forward. "Sir, that's exactly why we need to be there. This isn't just about one flight or one passenger. It's about whether people like us can do our jobs with dignity." Marcus recognized the truth in his words. For his crew members, particularly those of color, This situation resonated on a deeply personal level. They lived the reality of having their authority questioned, their presence challenged, their professionalism doubted because of their race. When Marcus returned to the boardroom, his decision was clear. "We're going with the third option," he announced. "We'll use this as a platform to strengthen our commitment to dignity and respect for all passengers and employees. We won't attack Whitfield personally, but we won't back down from the truth of what happened either." Barbara smiled approvingly. "I think that's the right call." "Thomas," Marcus continued, turning to his CFO, "prepare financial models for the worst-case scenario. If we lose some corporate contracts, I want to know we can weather the storm." Thomas nodded, already pulling up spreadsheets on his tablet. "Michael, work with Elena to prepare for the lawsuit. We fight it on the merits, no settlements." The chief counsel and Elena exchanged determined nods. "Vanessa, draft a comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative for all aspects of our operation. Hiring, training, customer service, everything. This needs to be substantive, not just PR." "Already on it," Vanessa confirmed. "And Melissa," Marcus concluded, "prepare a simple, direct statement for me to deliver after Whitfield's press conference. No corporate jargon, no evasion. Just the truth as we know it." As the team dispersed to execute their assignments, Marcus stepped out onto the office balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. The Los Angeles skyline stretched before him, a vista of possibility that had drawn him to expand Carter Airlines to the West Coast. His phone rang. It was Tanya. "How are the kids?" he asked immediately. "They're okay. We watched some movies. Ordered room service. They're resilient." She paused. "Jordan wants to come to the press conference." Marcus was surprised. "Are you sure that's a good idea? It could get ugly." I asked him the same thing. You know what he said? "Uncle Marcus, stood up for us. Now I want to stand with him." The simple statement from his 14-year-old nephew touched Marcus deeply. "What do you think, Tanya?" "I think," she hesitated, "I think our parents raised us to face difficulty head-on. Maybe we should do the same for our children." Marcus thought about it. Having Jordan present would certainly humanize the situation, showing the real family behind the headlines, but it would also expose him to the harsh spotlight of media attention. "Let me talk to him," Marcus decided. When Jordan came on the line, his voice was steady. "I want to be there, Uncle Marcus." "It might not be pleasant, Jordan. There could be hostile questions, comments that are hard to hear." "I know," the boy replied. "But I've been reading about this online. People are arguing about us like we're not real people, like we're just some symbol or something. I want them to see that we're actual people who are just trying to go on vacation." The maturity in Jordan's reasoning impressed Marcus. At 14, his nephew was already developing the awareness and courage that Black men in America needed to navigate a world that often viewed them with suspicion or hostility. "Okay," Marcus agreed finally. "But you stay with me, or your mom, the whole time, and if it gets too intense, we leave immediately. Deal?" "Deal," Jordan confirmed. An hour later, Marcus stood backstage at the hotel where both press conferences were scheduled. Richard Whitfield was currently at the podium, delivering a carefully crafted narrative that bore little resemblance to what had actually transpired on Flight 247. "Carter Airlines has demonstrated a troubling pattern of selective enforcement," Whitfield was saying. "As a platinum-level customer who has flown millions of miles, I was treated like a criminal for raising legitimate concerns about cabin disturbances." Marcus listened with Tanya and Jordan beside him, all three shaking their heads at the blatant misrepresentation. Behind them, the crew members from Flight 247 stood in silent solidarity, along with Elena Martinez and several passengers who had volunteered to speak if needed. "I have been a champion of diversity throughout my career," Whitfield continued, gesturing to several employees of color standing uncomfortably behind him. "This accusation of racism is not only false, but deeply hurtful to someone who has worked tirelessly to create opportunities for underrepresented communities." The performance was masterful in its manipulation, the injured tone, the strategic positioning of minority employees as props, the emphasis on his status and contributions. It was a playbook Marcus had seen executed by powerful white men throughout his career when confronted with their own biased behavior. "Questions?" Whitfield invited, and the room erupted with shouted inquiries from reporters. "Mr. Whitfield, multiple witnesses contradict your account. How do you respond to their statements? That you used racially charged language?" Whitfield smiled condescendingly. "In today's hypersensitive climate, any criticism of a minority person is automatically labeled as racist, regardless of intent or context. It's a troubling development that stifles honest dialogue." Another reporter called out, "Is it true that you demanded the black family be moved from first class despite their having legitimate tickets?" "I simply suggested that the airline enforce its own standards of decorum in premium cabins," Whitfield deflected. "The fact that the family in question happened to be black is entirely coincidental and irrelevant to my concerns." As the questioning continued, Marcus felt Jordan tense beside him. "He's lying," the teenager whispered, indignation clear in his voice. "I know," Marcus acknowledged softly, "but the truth will have its moment." When Whitfield finally concluded his remarks, he exited through a side door, avoiding any direct confrontation with Marcus or his family. It was time for Carter Airlines to present their side of the story. Marcus took a deep breath as he was introduced, stepping onto the stage with quiet confidence. Tanya and Jordan stood slightly behind him, a visual reminder of the real human beings at the center of the controversy. The flight crew lined up at the back of the stage, a powerful demonstration of employee solidarity. "Good morning," Marcus began. "My name is Marcus Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Carter Airlines. But today, I'm also speaking as an uncle, whose family was subjected to discriminatory treatment while flying on my own airline." He proceeded to recount the events truthfully, but without embellishment, letting the facts speak for themselves. He described Richard's escalating complaints, the coded language used, and the explicit statements made when Richard believed his business leverage would shield him from consequences. Carter Airlines was founded on a simple principle: everyone who purchases a ticket deserves to be treated with equal dignity and respect, Marcus explained. That principle isn't negotiable, even when upholding it comes at a business cost. He then introduced a series of initiatives that Carter Airlines would be implementing: enhanced anti-discrimination training for all staff, clear protocols for addressing biased behavior from passengers, and a new scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. These steps aren't a reaction to one incident, Marcus emphasized. They're an affirmation of values that have guided this company from its inception. The only difference is that now these values have been tested in a very public way. When the time came for questions, Marcus handled them with the same straightforward dignity that had characterized his response to Richard on the flight. He neither demonized Whitfield nor minimized the seriousness of what had occurred. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal asked the question many were thinking: "Mr. Carter, was this confrontation worth potentially jeopardizing major business, deals, and partnerships?" Marcus considered his answer carefully. "There are some principles that transcend business calculations. The right of my family, and by extension, all families, to travel without being subjected to prejudice is one of those principles. If standing firm on that value costs us certain partnerships, then those weren't partnerships we should have pursued in the first place." Another journalist pressed, "Some business leaders are suggesting you should have handled this privately, rather than creating a public confrontation. How do you respond?" "Racism thrives in privacy," Marcus replied simply. "When we address it behind closed doors, we reinforce the idea that it's too shameful or complicated to confront openly. I believe in transparency, both as a business leader and as a black man who has experienced discrimination throughout my life." As the press conference continued, a noteworthy shift occurred in the room. What had begun as a defensive explanation was transforming into something more powerful, a clear moral stance that resonated beyond the specifics of one incident. Jordan stepped forward when a reporter asked how the confrontation had affected the Carter family. With poise that belied his 14 years, he spoke directly to the cameras. "It wasn't the first time people looked at us like we didn't belong somewhere," he said quietly. "But it was the first time someone with power stood up and said clearly that we did belong. That matters." His simple statement cut through the corporate and legal complexities to the human heart of the matter. In the audience, several journalists were visibly moved. After the formal press conference concluded, Elena Martinez approached with unexpected news. "Mr. Carter, I've just received word that 3 former Whitfield Properties employees have reached out, willing to speak publicly about discrimination they experienced under Richard Whitfield's leadership." It was a potential game changer, evidence that would establish a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. "Thank you, Elena, but I don't want this to become a personal vendetta against Whitfield," Marcus reiterated. "This is about principles, not personalities." "I understand and respect that," Elena replied, "but sometimes principles need concrete examples to be fully understood. These individuals have been silenced by confidentiality agreements for years. Your stand has given them the courage to finally speak their truth." As Marcus considered this development, Jessica Wilson approached with the flight crew. "Mr. Carter, we wanted to thank you," she said, the others nodding in agreement. "What you did on that flight meant everything to us. For years we've had to smile through racist comments, sexist behavior, homophobic remarks, all because the customer is always right. You showed us that dignity isn't negotiable," Darius added. "I've had passengers refuse to accept drinks from me, asked to be served by someone else, meaning someone white. We're told to ignore it, to be professional. But you showed that true professionalism includes standing up for basic human respect." Their words reinforced for Marcus that the implications of his stand extended far beyond one confrontation with one passenger. It was about reshaping expectations and practices that had allowed discrimination to persist in subtle but damaging ways. As the group dispersed, Barbara approached with a smile. "The board just called. They've reviewed the video of both press conferences and want you to know they're 100% behind you. In fact, they've approved an additional budget for the anti-discrimination initiatives you announced." It was welcome news, but Marcus knew the road ahead would still have challenges. Richard Whitfield was powerful and vindictive, with resources to sustain a prolonged legal battle. The business implications would continue to unfold in unpredictable ways, and most importantly, his family was now thrust into a spotlight they hadn't sought. But looking at Jordan standing tall beside him, Marcus felt a deep certainty that he had made the right choice. Some battles were worth fighting, regardless of the cost. Have you ever had to choose between what's easy and what's right? Comment number 1 if you believe Marcus made the right choice standing up for his principles. Or comment number 2 if you think business leaders should avoid controversial stands. Like this video if you believe dignity should never be compromised, and subscribe to see the powerful conclusion to this real-life story of courage and consequences. What do you think will happen next? Will Marcus's stand create lasting change, or will Whitfield's power and influence prevail? Let's find out in our final chapter. 3 months after the confrontation on Flight 247, Marcus Carter stood before the Transportation Committee of the United States Congress. The hearing room was packed with industry leaders, civil rights advocates, journalists, and curious citizens. C-SPAN cameras broadcast the proceedings live to a national audience. "Mr. Carter," the committee chairwoman began, "thank you for appearing today. Your experience has sparked an important national conversation about discrimination in air travel and other public accommodations. Could you please share with the committee what happened on your airline and the subsequent developments?" Marcus adjusted the microphone and looked out at the assembled faces. Among them was his family, Tanya and the children sitting proudly in the front row. Also present were Jessica Wilson and several other Carter Airlines employees who had become unexpected advocates for change in the industry. Conspicuously absent was Richard Whitfield, whose public standing had deteriorated dramatically in the weeks following the incident. 3 former employees had indeed come forward with their own stories of discrimination at Whitfield Properties, breaking confidentiality agreements at significant personal risk. Their testimonies had revealed a pattern of racist behavior that made Richard's actions on Flight 247 seem less like an isolated outburst and more like a glimpse into his habitual conduct. "Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee," Marcus began, "what happened on our flight wasn't exceptional. What was exceptional was that it was documented witnessed and addressed directly rather than being minimized or ignored. Countless Americans experience similar treatment daily without cameras recording it or CEOs intervening. Over the next hour, Marcus detailed not just the confrontation itself, but the broader context of discrimination in travel. The subtle, and not so subtle ways that passengers of color were often made to feel unwelcome or scrutinized in premium spaces. He emphasized that the incident on Carter Airlines reflected systemic issues rather than one passenger's bad behavior. In the months since this occurred, Marcus explained, Carter Airlines has implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols throughout our operation. Every employee, from baggage handlers to board members, undergoes enhanced training, focused not just on avoiding discrimination, but on actively fostering inclusion. The committee members listened attentively, occasionally asking questions about specific policies or practices. It was clear that Marcus's testimony was being taken seriously as input for potential legislative action. One of our most significant changes, Marcus continued, is our Dignity First policy, which explicitly empowers employees to intervene when they witness discriminatory behavior, regardless of who is exhibiting it. No passenger's status, wealth, or connections exempt them from treating others with basic respect. A conservative committee member from Texas leaned forward. Mr. Carter, while I commend your commitment to treating all passengers fairly, aren't you concerned that this policy could be misinterpreted or abused? Could legitimate customer complaints be mischaracterized as discrimination? It was a question Marcus had anticipated. Congressman, our policy distinguishes between subjective service issues and clear instances of bias. We've found that with proper training, our staff can readily identify the difference between a passenger complaining about slow service and one who's targeting others based on their identity. After the hearing concluded, Marcus met briefly with several lawmakers who were drafting legislation to strengthen anti-discrimination protections in commercial travel. What had begun as a personal stand was evolving into potential policy change. At the national level, outside the Capitol, reporters waited for statements. Among them was a journalist from the Wall Street Journal who had been covering the story since it broke. Mr. Carter, can you comment on the settlement reached with Richard Whitfield? She asked. The lawsuit that Whitfield had threatened had indeed materialized, though not as he had originally envisioned. After the former employees came forward, Whitfield's position had weakened considerably. The lawsuit had been settled 2 weeks earlier, under terms that were favorable to Carter Airlines, but included mandatory sensitivity training for Whitfield himself. The terms of the settlement include confidentiality provisions, Marcus replied diplomatically. What I can say is that both parties have resolved their differences in a manner that affirms the importance of treating all people with dignity and respect. What Marcus didn't mention was his private meeting with Richard 3 days before the settlement was finalized. After months of legal maneuvering and public posturing, the two men had sat down face-to-face in a neutral location. Without lawyers present, the conversation had been surprisingly candid. Richard, his public reputation in tatters and his company losing contracts, had shown glimpses of genuine reflection, though not full understanding. I still don't believe I'm racist, he had insisted, but I recognize that my behavior that day was inappropriate. It's not about whether you consider yourself racist, Marcus had explained patiently. It's about the impact of your words and actions on others, regardless of your intent. Richard had struggled visibly with this concept, the idea that racism wasn't merely about conscious hatred, but about unconscious biases and systemic patterns that privileged some and marginalized others. What would you have done differently? Marcus had asked him directly. After a long pause, Richard had admitted, I wouldn't have assumed they didn't belong in first class. I would have given them the benefit of the doubt that I would give to a white family. It wasn't a complete awakening, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of the differential treatment that constituted the core of the problem. Now, as Marcus left the congressional hearing, he was met by Jessica Wilson and the newly formed Carter Airlines Dignity Team, a group of employees dedicated to implementing and refining the company's anti-discrimination initiatives. The training program launches company-wide next week, Jessica reported proudly. We've already had flight attendants from other airlines asking if they can participate. What had begun as an internal policy change was spreading throughout the industry. 3 other major carriers had announced similar initiatives in the preceding weeks, recognizing both the moral imperative and the business advantage of establishing clear anti-discrimination standards. Jessica had been promoted to lead the training program, her experiences on Flight 247 providing powerful teaching examples for new staff. Darius had become a sought-after speaker at industry conferences, sharing his perspective as a black flight attendant navigating predominantly white spaces. The business implications for Carter Airlines had stabilized in unexpected ways. After the initial stock volatility, the company had emerged stronger, with a clearer brand identity and a more loyal customer base. The Terminal East project in Atlanta was proceeding with new investors who specifically cited the company's values as a factor in their decision to participate. The Los Angeles expansion had been approved ahead of schedule, with the first 1,500 new jobs already filled. Richard Whitfield had resigned as CEO of Whitfield Properties under pressure from his board, though he remained a major shareholder. The company had implemented sweeping changes to its corporate culture, eager to distance itself from its founder's tarnished reputation. These corporate developments mattered, but for Marcus, the most significant impacts were more personal. Back at their Atlanta home that evening, he sat with Tanya and the children on the back porch, enjoying a rare moment of normalcy after months of intense public scrutiny. "My teacher used our story in class today," Jordan mentioned casually, though his proud expression betrayed how meaningful this was to him. "We were discussing civil rights history, and she talked about how standing up to discrimination still matters today." At 14, Jordan was at a crucial age, forming his identity and understanding of the world. The confrontation and its aftermath had shaped him in ways that would likely influence his entire life. "What did you think about that?" Marcus asked. Jordan considered the question thoughtfully. "It was weird at first, hearing our family discussed, like we're in a history book or something. But then I realized it's important for people to know this stuff still happens, you know? It's not all in the past." Zoe, who had been quieter since the incident, looked up from her book. "A girl at school asked me if I was scared when that man was yelling on the plane. I told her I wasn't scared because Uncle Marcus wouldn't let anything bad happen to us." Her simple faith touched Marcus deeply. In a world where black children often learned early that authority figures might not protect them, Zoe had witnessed something different. Power used to defend rather than oppress. Elijah, now 8, had processed the experience in his own way. He had initially been reluctant to fly again, asking anxious questions before their return trip to Atlanta. But Marcus had arranged for him to visit the cockpit and meet the pilots, transforming his fear into fascination. Now he wanted to be a pilot himself, declaring that he would fly planes where everybody is nice to each other. Tanya squeezed her brother's hand. "You changed things, Marcus. Not just for the airline or the industry, but for them." She nodded toward her children. They saw what it looks like when someone refuses to accept the status quo. It was the legacy that mattered, most to Marcus, not the congressional testimony or the policy changes or the business success, but the lesson his niece and nephews had absorbed, that they deserved to take up space in the world without apology or explanation. Later that night, Marcus received an email that brought the journey full circle. It was from a young black flight attendant at a competing airline. "I watched everything that happened with your family and your company. Yesterday, a first-class passenger made racist comments about a black family in my cabin. In the past, I would have smiled and tried to smooth things over. Instead, I calmly informed him that discriminatory language wouldn't be tolerated on our flight. My supervisor backed me up completely. The passenger apologized, and the family was able to enjoy their trip with dignity. I want you to know that your stand created ripples that are changing things for all of us. Thank you." Marcus sat with the message for a long moment, feeling the weight and the hope of it. One confrontation hadn't solved the deep, persistent problem of racism in America. Richard Whitfield hadn't experienced a miraculous transformation of heart and mind. The systems that enabled and protected privilege remained largely intact. But something had shifted, however slightly. Boundaries had been established. Expectations had been raised. People who had previously remained silent found their voices. It wasn't revolution, but it was movement, the slow, necessary work of bending the moral arc toward justice. The next morning, Marcus boarded a Carter Airlines flight to Chicago for a business meeting. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed a white passenger warmly greeting a black family with young children who were taking their seats nearby. "First time in first class?" the passenger asked them kindly. "Yes," the mother replied, a hint of defensiveness in her tone. "Well, you're in for a treat," the passenger said. "Carter Airlines has the best service in the industry." It was a small moment, easily overlooked, but to Marcus, it represented something profound. The possibility of spaces where everyone belonged, where no one's presence was questioned based on the color of their skin. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Elijah's question from months earlier echoed in his mind. "Are they going to take your airplane away, Uncle Marcus?" Looking around the diverse first-class cabin, at the respectful interactions between passengers and crew, at the subtle but meaningful changes that had begun to take root, Marcus knew with certainty that his answer had been correct. No one had taken his airplane away. Instead, they had helped build something better, an environment where dignity wasn't a privilege for some, but a right for all. And that was worth every cost. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have risked your business to stand up for what's right? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this powerful story. If you found this story moving or thought-provoking, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of courage and justice. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that standing up for dignity matters, especially when it comes at a cost. Thank you for joining us for this journey, and remember, our choices today create the world we'll live in tomorrow. Marcus Carter's confrontation with Richard Whitfield teaches us that standing up against racism often comes at a cost, but dignity is worth fighting for. The story reminds us that racism persists in subtle and overt forms, especially in spaces where people of color are underrepresented. By refusing to compromise his principles despite business threats, Marcus demonstrated that true leadership means defending what's right, even when it's difficult. The ripple effects of one courageous stand can extend far beyond a single incident, inspiring others to find their voices against discrimination. While confronting racism doesn't guarantee immediate transformation in those with prejudiced views, it establishes boundaries and raises expectations for respectful treatment. Most importantly, when children witness adults defending their right to belong, they develop confidence rather than internalizing the message that they must make themselves small to accommodate others' comfort. Sometimes the most powerful legacy we create isn't in business achievements, but in showing the next generation how to navigate the world with dignity and courage. Has there been a moment in your life when you witnessed discrimination and had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? What did you choose, and how did it affect you? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire others facing similar situations. If this account of standing against racism resonated with you, please hit the like button to help more people discover it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories about courageous individuals who refuse to accept injustice. And if you know someone who needs this reminder that dignity is non-negotiable, share this video with them. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Remember, change happens one brave decision at a time, and your voice matters more than you know.